Now we're going to look at some examples of curriculum models. And there are three terms here that I would like to introduce. One is integrated, multidisciplinary, and the third is interdisciplinary. And quite honestly, when teachers, even teachers on teams in middle schools, are talking about connecting or blending content areas, almost always they use the word integrated to mean all different types of connections. But technically, these are three different approaches when we talk about curriculum. If we are truly using an integrated model, that means that students have a lot of input in the planning of that particular unit. The teachers would sit down with the students and they would plan the unit out together. You can imagine how much time and effort that would take. Teachers will, of course, be the facilitators. They will be the ones who will guide the process. They will be the ultimate decision makers as their team makes decisions about what the unit will look like. But the students will feel ownership because they have been a part of the planning process. In a multidisciplinary model, you'll have more than one content area, and they may relate in some way, but there are no activities that actually blend more than one content area. So for example, you might have, if we have two content areas such as social studies and language arts, there might be objectives met, activities that are done in each of those content areas that do kind of connect to each other, and they do relate. And in fact, each of the teachers may refer to the other teacher's content area in order to make those connections for students or to help students make those connections. But there's no actual blending, and we'll look at an example of that in just a moment. Interdisciplinary models do include activities or series of activities in which content areas truly are blended. So you might have 2 or 3 or 4 content areas that are blended into one activity, so that if you were to ask a student, what subject area are you studying right now, he or she might not know for sure. It's so well blended. A quick and very simple example would be if one of your objectives in language arts was had to do with persuasive writing, and another in math had to do with figuring interest rates or percentage or something like that. Those seem pretty unrelated, but an activity that you might have as part of a whole unit might include a group of students who hypothetically own a business or a bank or a car dealership or something like that, and they write an ad for the newspaper. So the ad would contain some kind of persuasive writing, but it might also, you might also require them to include some kind of a chart or information about how much payments would be based on certain interest rates and that kind of thing. So you might be able to blend those two. And that is a pretty simple example, but you can imagine with a team of teachers how easy it would be to come up with some really creative and innovative ways to do that. We're going to look at some specific graphics, actually, some examples, and these are out of a book by Robin Fogarty. And interestingly enough, in the title of this particular book is the word integrated. So she herself uses the word integrated to kind of mean everything. And she uses about 10 different examples, but we're going to look at 4: sequenced, shared, threaded, webbed, in order to get a good idea of some of the differences among these models. The first one, and I realize that these copies are not the best, but this is about the best we could do for this. The first one is a sequenced model, and if later you can spend more time looking at these, but if you look on the left in this little kind of Venn diagram, the subject area is language arts, on the right it's social studies. And if you look at the bottom, they have a list of things that these teachers would have taught anyway. And all they've really done is resequenced things so that they kind of go together at the same time. And so if the language arts teacher is really going to be reading The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, he or she may as well do that with students while the social studies teacher is talking or doing activities about the American Revolution. These two teachers know what's going on with each other, and so that they can routinely refer to each other's content area. But all that's really happening here is a sequence, and that's why we call this a sequenced model. The next one is a shared model, and you can see the circles in the little Venn diagram overlap. And in this case, we're again only taking two content areas. One is science, one is language arts, but there's some overlapping. In the science area, the main idea here is photosynthesis, while in the language arts area, it's interviews, again, to very different kinds of topics. And there's some subtopics for each. Under science is ecology, ecosystem, etc. But also flowcharts, if you notice, is part of that. In the language arts, they're talking about biographies, respect for point of view, following a plot line. The parts that intersect can be whatever the team decides. In this case, they've taken a concept, an attitude, and a skill. And that's what overlaps between the two. So the concept of cycles overlaps between science and language arts. And again, each of these teachers can refer to that concept of cycle within their own content area. With attitude, the attitude here is respect. And again, in each of their own content areas, they can refer to that and do their own activities with that, but they can also refer back to each other's content area. Same thing with the skill of sequencing. So this is a shared model. This is a threaded model, as you can see. It's kind of like those wooden blocks that toddlers string. And the thread is the thing that connects each of these content areas. In this case, they're taking the four core areas: math, social studies, science, and language arts. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a little checklist, and you could add other things to that as your team. You could decide what you wanted to do. But in this particular example, they're choosing a thinking skill that will thread its way through all four content areas. The thinking skill specifically is cause and effect. So in math, for example, they're going to be doing some things on statistics, and they're going to look at cause and effect as variable change. If you skip down to science, they're doing an ecology kind of unit, and they're going to be looking at causes of pollution and the effects of that. So the thinking skill, specifically about cause and effect, is linked or threaded through all of these content areas. This works pretty nicely if the content areas, or whatever teachers are doing within the content areas themselves, don't overlap very nicely for whatever reason. You can still have something that connects all of the content areas. So this is a threaded model. And this last one is a webbed model, and as you can see, it's the more complex one. But it's one that we use quite a bit. In this case, you have a particular theme or idea. Sometimes teachers call this a themed model in the middle, and all of the content areas are webbed out from that particular theme. In this case, besides the four core areas, they've added fine arts and health. And the thing I like about this model is if you look at the math circle, for example, they're looking at the theme of change as it relates to algebraic equations. But those little offshoots from math, skills, concepts, cooperative learning, those are things that that particular math teacher wants to make sure he or she covers. And so those little offshoots allows that individual flavor to the unit. If you look at the health teacher, they're looking at changes in values through the ages, and there's a little offshoot about lifelong fitness. That's what that particular teacher wants to be sure to cover. These are pretty simple models, but they do illustrate pretty well a way that teams can plan their curricular units. These are nice to use for new teams. If they haven't done this before, they can actually use these as kind of a template. You can always change it later to fit your team, but it at least gives teams a place to start.